be a pretty interactive day, so you will not be able to hide from me or from the class. So hopefully you're ready to talk about stuff. So there are no questions. Let's just dive right in. Like I said, today we'll finish talking about Wilkerson's book on caste. And maybe the first part I can just lecture a little bit, but then, like I said, I have an exercise for you guys. So don't go anywhere. I know all of your, actually, I don't know. Are your cameras off? I never look for your cameras, but yeah, it looks like all your cameras off. So don't feel like you can hide because I'm going to make you do stuff in a minute. So there's this idea of the sacred thread. I'll just kind of get the ball rolling. If you didn't read this yet, open it now and read along with me, because again, I'm going to make you do an activity with this reading. Here's what it looks like. Wilkerson caste. Pretty big margins, pretty small amount of type on each page. This is it's a popular book, right? It's not an academic book, so it should be relatively easy to read, but it's still dealing with, some topics that we've covered in this class. So for example, we get, where was it? Brahmins, Kshatriya, Vaishya. Do you guys remember that stuff? So these are the castes of ancient India. And what this chapter is talking about, this idea of a sacred thread, is one way of marking that you are a high caste, right? So here's a young boy wearing a sacred yellow thread. It's this yellow thread here. He's wearing a bunch of stuff like the flower garlands and stuff. But what we're focusing on is this kind of thin yellow thread. You see that? So when young boys, and they are boys, right? It's sort of a gendered activity. When a high caste young boy is born, that is the first time they're born. And then when they go through this rite of passage where they receive this sacred thread, they become twice born. So that's one way to talk about these high caste men, right? Is they are twice born. And so there's a sense of, by going through these rituals, they sort of enter into this higher status, right? It's a way of ritually establishing that they are these high caste people. And so anyone who has this sacred thread would be considered part of the high caste. But if you might notice, the name of this chapter is Shedding the Sacred Thread. So maybe I'll just open this up. Why would someone shed their sacred thread? Aren't sacred threads nice? I'll let you think about it. Open the window. Huh? Come on, I told you, you got to talk to me today. Why would anybody shed their sacred thread? Again, if you did not read this, it is very short and very easy to read. So please start reading it now. This particular chapter is only 4 pages. But you don't even have to read it to be able to figure this out, right? So as I just mentioned a moment ago, this is kind of a marker of caste. And so what this is talking about is shedding this marker of caste. Why would someone ever do that?
Maybe when he gets in trouble or something.
Okay. Gets in trouble. Interesting. What kind of trouble are you thinking of, Harrison?
Maybe when he told a lie.
Okay. Well, now I think you're just guessing, but it's okay. No, this is not like you're being punished for being bad or something like that, right? It's more like well, again, you can look at it, right? It's a story of a Brahmin whose father was also Brahmin, of course, and he had sort of a mental breakdown. So like on page 362, actually, you know what? We can just look at it together. Let's look at it together. Page 362, right? we're talking about a boy's father. I have it marked on my paper copy here. Yeah, this is the one. So we're talking about, the story of this Brahmin boy, right? Um, he kept his, it's talking about a sacred thread. Keep it clean, keep it pure. Remember we talked about purity and pollution? Remember that stuff? And how, the top of your body is pure and the bottom of your body is impure. Remember all that? You can just write a Y. Like, because I can't see you nodding your head, right? You can silently nod, and then, then I might be able to see it, but I can't see it. So write a Y for me if you if you do remember something, or you could write an N if you don't remember.
Is he, Professor, is he saying like, they would shed their sacred thread because they've disappointed their caste, basically? Because I'm seeing that it says that, oh well, now I can't see it, but I can pull it up. But wasn't it that he like dishonored his caste, so now he fled from his family, so now he's trying to maybe like shed that sacred thread because he did them dirty, kind of, I guess, or like didn't, he kind of just let down his caste, so now he kind of wants to let all of that shed from him.
You're on the right track, yeah. The reason I changed the screen is because our author is a woman, right? Isabel Wilkerson. I've talked about Wilkerson before. Maybe you guys don't remember. And it's important to know authors because you can then think about what perspective are they speaking from, right? So Isabel Wilkerson, she is not, a member of this cast or anything, right? She's an outsider talking about it. So what is she talking about? So Yahya got us started. Maybe there's some sort of moment of difficulty, of conflict, where maybe this person doesn't want to be a part of the caste system anymore, right? And so if this sacred thread is a symbol of the caste system, by shedding the thread, we are shedding the caste system, right? Does that make sense? Now, I think Yahya got us on the right track, but we still need to think about why, right? Why would somebody do this? Because, isn't it good to be at the top of the caste system? Isn't that kind of desirable? Why would anybody want to get out of the caste system, especially a high caste person? Why would
Maybe he just like doesn't believe in the values.
In what values?
Like maybe he doesn't believe in like the fact that he is at a higher status than other people.
Yeah. Okay. So this is good. ISIS has freedom of choice, social, societal pressure. I'm going to do you guys a service. I know a lot of people say societal. That's a word that it's become more popular. It makes you sound kind of like I don't know, like it's a bit more fancy than social. But I think it means the same thing as social, doesn't it? Social pressure, societal pressure. Anyways, maybe I'm reading into that word a bit too much. But so yes, there's some reason he was. Sorry to call you out. But this is something, and it's not only you. I see it in the newspaper. I see it in like magazine articles and all that sort of stuff. As you can tell, I care about words, so I can't help myself when I see things like this. The father let untouchable lower caste chase away his master. Well, his father was the one who was chased. All right, so now we're catching up. We're getting there. Very good. So you have high caste person encounters a low caste person. High caste person initially is gonna like punish him violently, right? And again, violence is often used to enforce the caste system in ancient India, in America, and everywhere else, right? But the Dalit laborer, right? That's the low caste person, the lower caste untouchable person, chased him away, just like Yahya said, exactly. And so the father was ashamed, and he kind of had a breakdown, right? They searched for him, and they finally found him chanting in a room surrounded by images of gods. He said he lost his father that day, right? And it's not really clear exactly what the breakdown was, but maybe he was mentally unwell from the start. Maybe some sort of pressure was building up. But in any case, his father kind of lost himself in this moment. And again, why was he in the conflict to begin with? Again, it's the caste system, right? The caste system forced him into this conflict. The lower caste person didn't pay him proper respect. And so therefore it led to this conflict that eventually kind of broke the man, right? But of course, the story doesn't end there. That was just page number 2. When we get into page number 3, number 4, this is when we finally shed the thread, right? So here's the Brahmin guy talking. I've ripped off my sacred thread, he told the Dalit, a professional man. It was a poisonous snake around my neck, and its toxic venom was getting inside of me. Why does he call it a poisonous snake? That's a pretty extreme thing to say. And again, this is what the thread looks like. Sorry, that's Wilkerson. This is what the thread looks like. It doesn't look too poisonous to me. Why is he saying it's a poisonous snake?
Maybe because from an outside perspective, it's not like you wouldn't think that there's anything bad going on. You just think that that's just these people's cultures. But obviously, he's experienced something that he believes, it kind of snuck up on him. These that kind of realization. So you can say that that sneaking up on him and that like realization that his culture isn't what he thought it was, maybe, or like just the fact that it's detrimental in some way, that is comparable to the snake being sneaky and bad.
Yeah, yeah. And so he's becoming sort of what to say, repulsed by his own culture. Isis says it's slowly suffocating him. It's literally wrapped around his neck. Yeah, it's a very powerful symbol, right? This idea of wearing a necklace. I know we just think of it as jewelry or something like that, but when you put a ritual around it, when you put all these symbols upon it, right? I mean, we do that too with like wedding rings and that sort of stuff. And maybe if you're in a bad marriage, then your wedding ring starts to feel like a poisonous snake too. It's almost like a similar idea. So I like this analysis. I think you guys got it. Another way to put it, this is from 363. I'll just read it from the page. He began to see himself differently, to see the illusion of his presumed superiority, that he had been told a lie, and that his father had been told a lie, and that trying to live up to the lie had taken some part of his father away. And it goes on, but maybe that's enough. What is the lie? What is the lie that they were told? In some ways, what is the lie of the caste system? I know we're reaching a little bit because this is going back to the first part of the course, but you guys remember, I'm sure. Hi, Simone.
I don't know how to explain it, but one thing that I do find weird is that the Brahmins are supposed to be pure. However, one touch can make them immediately unpure, and that you think that their purity is stronger. And second of all, what really is the difference between the people in the different castes? Other than that, it just says so.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, so Ice is getting to some nice details here, right? So maybe the idea of purity is a lie, right? That some people are more pure than others. And like she also said, the entire system in many ways is a lie. This idea like some people are inherently better and other people are not as good. I mean, we wrote a forum post about this a long time ago, right? Where some people are like the mouth of the god and other people are like the feet of the god. But that too is a story, right? It can be a powerful story. But it's definitely not the only way to think about people. And so it is one way of looking at oneself and the world. And in this story, at the very least, the story of this particular Brahmin's life, he found this just to be a giant lie that was suffocating him. What was suffocating to him? It was closing him off from his colleagues, from the rest of the world, right? Again, if you read it by now, he encountered Dalits, right, low-class people at work and in various other professional settings, and he started to work with them and stand up for them and have a sense of community with them. And it was this thread that would separate him from them, right? It is the thread that had reminded him that he was different from them. So in any case, he ripped it off, poisonous steak. My message would be to take off the fake crown You will be happier and freer without it. You will see all of humanity. You will find your true self. And this is kind of, we talked about this, like, for example, when Ravana was killed, right? He was, his true self was sort of pure and behind all of these impurities on the outside, right? So it's basically, in some ways, it is the caste system itself that leads to an impurity, is maybe one way we could think about it. So that's all well and good, you know, and clearly this is about India and the caste system in India. How does this apply to America? What would this idea of shedding the sacred thread look like in America? Because one thing we talked about is there is a caste system in America, right? Obviously, the details and the history are different, but there's a similar system of power and purity and separating different castes of people. So what would this idea of shedding the sacred thread look like in America? Again, that's kind of what Wilkerson's book is all about, is comparing these different caste systems. I know, you know, it might feel like we talked about this a long time ago, but it's an important lesson, and we've kind of learned a lot about different ways of thinking about ourselves and society and the way we relate to society. We saw something almost like a caste system in the World War II Japanese internment camp, right? People were interned, we could say, because they were a lower caste. It was not because of their class. It was not because of the money they made. It was because of what they looked like, right? Because of their social status. We could say it was because of their race. That's another way to talk about it, right? What would this idea of shedding the sacred thread look like in America? Okay, so Isa says it depends on which system. Could you say more? What systems do you have in mind? Okay, so for wealth, it'd be income equality. I like that. For ableism, it'd be accessible places. Aha, I like that too. Yeah, so what Isa is thinking about, and please continue if you have other things you're thinking about, is where are kind of discrepancies in power in America, right? For wealth, it's kind of like class. Remember, we compared class and caste. So it would be decreasing these gaps between the different classes. It'd be like a rich person willingly paying more taxes or making donations, right? And decreasing wealth inequality. So that's great. Ableism, accessible places, right? So thinking about how people move throughout the world, right? Can everybody go upstairs? Maybe not, right? And so shedding the sacred thread would be striving to decrease the gap between those who are able and unable to navigate this world in the same way. Racism, equality, and desegregation. This is the big one for Wilkerson. Maybe you guys remember she talks about caste versus racism basically as if they're the same thing. And that'll be the next question I have for you, actually, is what is the relationship between caste and racism? And then finally, gender. Also, we could think about the gap between the different genders, right? So for perhaps someone like me, right, it's thinking about what kind of ways could I spread out opportunities for people of different kinds, different genders, different situations, and try to empower them as well. Allowing freedom to practice without judgment. Yeah, so these are all examples of where we're thinking about discrepancies of power, right? But I think one lesson to take away from it is the same thread that makes this boy special also separates him from the rest of society, right? And so in order to kind of overcome that separation, something needs to be lost in a way. There are many races, and in a hierarchy based on their proximity to whiteness, white, Asian, Hispanic, Latino, Black people. Yeah, well, and so what Isa is laying out here is basically Wilkerson's point. So maybe you guys remember, for her, there's high caste, there's low caste, but then there's also sort of middle caste, and she lays it out basically the same way that Aista is. And again, it's not like this is somehow true. There's no biological reality to this, and yet the same thing that Aista is pointing out is also pointed out by Wilkerson. There is something socially true about this, right? So again, this message of taking off the fake crown, I think, as Aista was saying, there are many different realms and systems in America where we might apply this kind of message. So how does that sound? Is that story pretty clear? Obviously, there are no more exams, and so I can't force you to memorize anything anymore. But I think this message is important, and we can even bring this into our discussion when we start talking about this book too. So questions or other thoughts on this? Okay, so again, we're reaching a little bit back into caste, right? But maybe I can just sort of remind you. One special thing about this book is Wilkerson doesn't really use the word race or racism very much. She talks about caste instead. The section we read for today talks a little bit about racism, but it's mostly other people using the word racist or racism. And so it's worth thinking about, why caste instead of race or racism? And if you have thoughts on that now, I'd be happy to hear them. If you don't, then this is something we can kind of work toward as we go through the exercise I have planned for you today. We've studied Buddhism a little bit now, and we didn't really talk about caste in Buddhism. Race is very ambiguous. Well, caste can be defined. I think they both can be defined. It's true, and they're both ambiguous, but maybe they're defined in different ways. Maybe could you help us, Isa? How should we define caste? I mean, we can look them up in the dictionary, right? Let's look up race. What do we get? Competition between runners. No, that's not what we're looking for. A ginger root, also not it. Major groupings into which humankind is considered in various theories or contexts to be derived on the basis of physical characteristics or shared ancestry. Okay, so physical characteristics, shared ancestry, lots of other stuff. Biology. Ooh, you get a big box. They're talking about Nazis and stuff. Yeah, so this is clearly, like I was saying, it's a pretty ambiguous term, pretty hard to define. Well, caste is how society as a whole treats you. Yeah, so this is the way in which society kind of builds its groups. Here they talk about Hindu society, right? Degrees of ritual purity and pollution, or social status. Different races to different people. Yeah, well, one thing we're kind of dancing around, society deems you important. You'll be treated as such. One thing we're dancing around is maybe kind of biology versus social construct. Have you guys heard of social constructs before? What's a social construct? Have you heard this term before?
Yeah, so a social construct can be kind of like, an example could be gender, because so there's biological gender, which is kind of the sex that you're assigned when you're born, but then gender comes with roles in it that don't necessarily fit to the gender that you were assigned. And so gender can sometimes become something way more social rather than biological. So one thing is for girls, then one thing is for boys. And yeah.
Yeah, very good. So, and Mario says, say it louder for the people in the back, which is good. And so it's a great example where a lot of us feel like, yeah, gender, that's just biology. You know, boys have a certain anatomy and girls have another anatomy. It's just biology. There's no other way to think about it. But I think particularly now, maybe I could even separate myself from you guys and say your generation are quite more aware of the socially constructed aspects. Because again, what does it mean to construct? It just means we build expectations around certain people. And one way you can kind of prove this is show that there are actually different expectations of different genders across different societies. Obviously, some things are shared and some things are maybe even somewhat biological, but at the end of the day, like Simone is saying, most of this, if arguably even all of it, is is built by society. So if we go back to caste is very clearly a social construct. You guys agree with me? Caste is a social construct, right? Yeah. And so there's no question about that, right? It's made by these myths, it's made by these stories, it's made by even scriptures, right? And I had you guys write about that earlier in the semester. Now, race, maybe I'll turn this into a question. Is race a social construct? What do you guys think? That's a harder question because at least some part of race is biological, right? I mean, we looked it up a moment ago. We don't have to do it again. But, in terms of like looking at species of birds and whatever, right? The language of race might be able to sort of be brought in there. So there's at least some biological aspect of it. But is there a social construction aspect of race? What do you guys think? If you had to say race is more biological or is it more social in its construction, which would you say?
I think race is definitely obviously biological, but I think we all kind of somehow made it a social construct based off of white people's standards, if that makes sense.
I think I understand what you're saying. I think there's a lot more you could say about what is a white people standard, but we can certainly keep looking at that together. It depends, and that's why it's ambiguous. Have you guys heard of what is it called, like 23andMe, like the DNA testing and stuff? Is that what it's called? Let's look it up.
Yeah, that's what it's called.
Yeah, 23andMe genetic testing, right? And when you do these genetic testing, it's DNA, it's clearly biological, right? And what you do is you give them your DNA and they tell you what race you are, right? You guys are familiar with this? But I should warn you that that's actually a bit of a lie, in the sense that what it does is, I guess first I'll say, if there are any biologists in the crowd, please provide more details with this. But at preparing for class, I did look up some of these numbers. We are 99%, vast majority of our genes are exactly the same. People are 40% black, but look 100% white. Yeah, and even this language of 40% versus 1% versus whatever percent, I mean, you can calculate that based on your parents, but that's assuming that your parents or your grandparents or whatever are 100% purebred of one race. But of course, that too is biologically indeterminable. We don't know. We don't know, right? These are just, again, kind of constructions that we create for ourselves relatively recently, right? Back kind of the eugenics Nazi time about 100 years ago, this sort of language about like what percent are you and all this sort of stuff became very popular and very important because, for example, in Nazi Germany, if you were a certain percent Jewish, you would be murdered systematically, right? But that too is constructed. It's constructed just based on who is just decided that they are Jewish or not. Now, some people might be thinking, but my skin and my hair and my eyes and all that sort of stuff. Yes, that is a part of your DNA, but it's a very, very small part, right? Most of our organs, our blood, our immune systems, right? Like the fact that black and brown people disproportionately get more COVID these days, that has nothing to do with biology, right? That's all social, economic causes. Mitochondrial DNA. Some
Yeah.
people.
That, for example, what I wanted to say is if we're talking about biology, like the way we were talking about gender before, one part is just like the the biological, like the when you were born with, and then the roles that come with it, because you know, you don't really choose exactly the gender that you were assigned when you're born, you know. But with but that implies certain things. So it's like, if you're a woman, you know, I'm gonna get paid less. Or if, you know, it comes with certain things, and with race. But of course, like I wouldn't really know exactly what that's like, because I'm from South America, but I'm white. So it's not like I know exactly what it's like. But you know, when you're born and you experience racism, it's not your biology. Someone's not like thinking, oh, I mean, it's a bit conflicted, because in the end, you already have those roles assigned to you, which
Yeah,
is very
so-
difficult, because a lot of it comes with very like police brutality, or for example, the hate crimes.
And so, yeah, exactly. These are all social reactions to what might look like, you know, we could say biological realities. But again, the biological reality is that there's actually only one race, the human race. Maybe you've heard this line before, but in terms of DNA, that is the case, right? It's these very small, minor mutations that don't actually affect the, what's the word? The expression of DNA. It's just like weird little mutations that are sort of in the background. Those are the only differences that this 23andMe thing traces, right? So again, in the end, we are all made of the same stuff. And I love that Simone was sharing her own background, right? She is white. She's also South American. And these are often sort of different categories. And it also demonstrates that this idea of white is also kind of a social construct, right? Who gets included in the white category, something we talked about before. Many people from Italy, many people from Portugal, from the southern part of Europe were not included in the white category until relatively recently, right? Until, let's say, within the last 60 or 70 years. But then how does the social part come in? Well, through laws, through the enforcement of those laws, and other various social facts, right, that we've been exploring in this class. So so good. I feel like we've got the ball rolling. We've got some things to think about. Why don't we do this exercise I've been pointing at? So now I've got some Google Docs for you. Since there are two of them, they're both very short, right? Little short readings, but let's do it. So Simone, when you fill out what's your race, what do you put? Well, Simone, obviously, if you don't want to answer, you don't have to answer. You can DM.
No. It's
Sorry, I just felt like asking because
no,
you know.
of course. So what I do is, race is different than ethnicity. So for race, I'll put white, but then I will put Hispanic, Latino. And you'll notice, like, when you fill out those forms, you'll notice that when they ask you for race, they won't say Hispanic or Latino or anything like that, but they will ask you, like that option will come up with ethnicity. Because a Hispanic person, like someone from Spain, can be white, and someone it's different because you don't go through the same struggles. And a lot of people who are like, oh no, I'm from, and I know this happens in Chile, it's like some people will be like, no, I'm from South America, so I can say certain like racial slurs because I also go through like some sort of oppression. So South America can be quite problematic, like, and but that's what I normally do, because there's a difference between race and ethnicity.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Well, and so these are, again, another kind of complicated category, right? Ethnicity. And how is that substantially different from race? Well, as Yaya was pointing out in her question, these are legal categories, right? And so it doesn't mean there's necessarily some biological reality to them, but there is a social reality to them, there is a legal reality to them. So they are very real, right? In the same way that sex also is a legal reality too. Yeah, I mean, one thing it makes me think of too, it's a bit of a tangent, but maybe it's worth pointing out, is now there's a lot of talk about kind of violence against Asians, as if Asian is one category. And maybe this is something a little close to my heart. I've spent a lot of time in Asia. Asia is not the most useful category. There are a lot of different kinds of Asian people. Some different Asian countries get along better than others. Other Asian countries fight wars against each other. And so this idea of kind of Asians as being one big category is also a bit of a problem. So the usual conversation about sort of white versus people of color or white versus BIPOC, it's trying to do work in America, but then once you expand beyond the American context, this idea of white sort of fizzles out, and the idea of Asian sort of fizzles out, and all of the, like Simone was saying, all of these categories kind of fall apart outside of very specific instances, particularly in America. Let's do this exercise because we actually only have. We still have some time. We have 25 minutes, but there are two groups. There are two Word documents. Here, I'll just open one of them. I'm gonna split you into two groups and just ask you to do one of them. It's basically just read this short story. It's very short, very easy. And then think about caste versus racism, right? Because basically both of the questions for both of the stories I'm gonna ask you, is this person racist, right? So one of the Wilkerson's friends says, you're racist. This restaurant is racist, right? And so I want you to think, is this racism? And how is caste maybe a little different from racism, okay? So just think racism versus caste. I'm gonna make these rooms. So room one, do this first link, please. And then room two, please do the second link. So I'll jump into the room and send you the links, but I don't know if you can tell which room you're in, but here we go. There are only two rooms. So please, room one, first link, the radicalization of the dominant caste. Room two, the heart is the last frontier. And then we'll come back together and share notes. So I want you to think, racism, yes or no? Okay, hey guys.
One is black and one of them is white. They go to a restaurant and they're waiting for their orders, and the waiter delays both of their orders a lot for a very long period of time, even after the white woman had complained several times about where her drinks were, where their food was, because the waiter was just serving to other people.
Mm-hmm.
And then she started getting very angry, and because the food was, like, once they received the food was already cold. It wasn't good. She was very angry, and like she stood up. She told people, this is about racism. This is racist because my friend is black.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like this, like, I want to talk to your manager, basically.
Mm-hmm.
The manager comes out and she's also black. But she starts like apologizing as well, and they leave. But Wilkerson is upset because her friend has the privilege to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And that if Wilkerson had done the same, she probably wouldn't have gotten the same response.
Mm-hmm.
But also that it's kind of, she didn't want to be part of this. Like she said like her friend basically wouldn't last a day.
Okay, well, thank you, Simone. So I think you covered the story very nicely, and this last part is a little bit open to interpretation, right? And so we can discuss the last part. Maybe I'll ask first, has this ever happened to anyone? Have you ever been at a restaurant and the service has been slow and you put your order in and then the people who come after you end up getting their food before you? Has that ever happened to you guys before? If you're nodding, I can't see you.
Yeah, that's definitely happened.
It definitely happens, right? If you go to restaurants, it's going to happen. It usually happens when they're busy, right? I don't know if anybody's ever worked at a restaurant. If you have, I have worked at a restaurant, and it sucks when you're busy, right? You're carrying plates, you're sweating, you're like, oh, I forgot your drink order, my bad. I got to bring this over there, I got to do this over here. And so when we think about, yeah, it gets totally hectic, exactly. When we think about this waiter, now we can sort of step outside of the story. The friend, right? And I have these nice white women saying Black Lives Matter, right? The friend is saying, you're racist, right? You weren't serving us because my friend is Black. And I guess I want to ask you guys, what do you think? Was the waiter being racist? I mean, we can't know if we weren't there, but just your analysis on this situation from your understanding of the situation. Would you say that the waiter was being racist? And so this is the key question in a way. We're getting at, again, what does it mean to be racist, right? That's kind of what I'm asking you. And so here's a very specific example. Is this racist?
I think, I don't know if it was, I don't know. I think a very key point for me was the way they described how he was towards their table, like curt, which is like to be like kind of rude. And then with the other table, who was also white, he was very like nice, or whatever the word was that they used to describe him.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's clear that it is a little bit of racism,
Mm-hmm.
because, you know, regardless, I've been a waitress before, and regardless of who I have, I will always treat someone the same way.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that he was more attentive with the other table and less attentive with their table shows that there's some sort of discrimination going on.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so I would think it's definitely racist.
Okay. And so Yaya was very thoughtful about this. She's like, it's a little bit racist. And then she sort of thought about it more, but she's like, yes, it is definitely racist. And Jessica says it's racist too. Maybe I can add a sort of a sub question. Do you think the waiter was being racist on purpose? Do you think he was thinking, oh, here's a person who doesn't look like me, I'm going to give them slower service? Do you think that was his thought process?
Most likely not, because of internalized racism.
Mm-hmm.
And we all go through it just the same way that even women have internalized sexism, and that sometimes we're not intentionally doing things that we that are racist, but it'll be there because that's what we were surrounded with growing up.
Yeah, and so that's why I like this example, is because usually we think about racism is like, again, like Hitler or something, right? It's somebody who is being consciously, explicitly, loudly discriminatory against somebody. Here it's smaller, right? Here it's quieter than that. And I think when we analyze what's really going on, like Yaya did for us, like Jessica did in the chat, there is discrimination happening. I think there's no doubt there is some kind of discrimination happening. It's just, yeah, it's a microaggression. And these are all sort of buzzwords that we hear, but here's a very specific example, right? And I think that's one reason that Wilkerson moves to this language of caste, is because we can call this a moment of caste, and that actually makes perfect sense, right? If we start talking about racism, like, again, the example that I know the best is there was this hate crime performed against Asian people. They were murdered because they were Asian. And I have a friend who wrote an article about it, and people wrote back to her being like, it wasn't about race, right? And maybe if we said it's about caste, it's about them being immigrants, it's about them being sort of perceived as a lower category, then people might say, okay, well, yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. But for some reason, this word racism is a very touchy subject, right? And we don't like being called racist. People will say, I'm not racist, but blah, 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 blah. I'm sure you've heard that construction before, right? So this word racism is actually a very sort of, it's a very uncomfortable concept. We don't want to be a racist country. We don't want to be racist people. And yet these moments happen where something that feels like racism and people are still kind of reluctant to call it that, right? So I've actually done this exercise before in another class, and they said this is not racist. So maybe it goes to show it really depends on who you're asking. But I think we can all agree that something is happening here, right? Some kind of caste. That they're not fully seeing the problem, implicit bias. Yeah, exactly. We kind of jump to say we are not racist before analyzing. Yeah, no one wants to be racist, right? I think that's been established. I guess let's just say very few people. I shouldn't say no one. There are those out there, I'm sure, who are proud to be racist, but it's the very extreme minority, right? More acts of racism, or we could say caste or implicit bias or whatever we want to call it, show up in kind of these restaurant style situations where it's a little hard to even put your finger on what just happened. Very good. I'd like to continue talking about this, but let's jump to the next one. Group 2, what did you guys talk about? Group 2, what was your story?
We had a story about like a plumber visiting this woman's house. And so first of all, before I want to share my opinion on this, I want to say that like obviously I wasn't there, so there's no way to determine. But just based off of what I've read, I don't want to sound like a bad person, but it just seemed like kind of exaggerated. but listen, like I don't want to sound bad because like if that really happened to her and those experiences happen to so many people, and if that truly happened, like I feel so bad for her, and like these are the things that really are a problem in our country. But that being said, there was some things that she said, like they said like she was the only person at the house at the time, and there were people that come to the door and they were like, are you the woman of the house? Like obviously if she's the only person at the house, like she's the woman of the house. No one just lets like a random stranger into their house, no matter who they know, you know what I mean, without being home. So I don't know, there were certain aspects for me that I was like, I don't know, like I question the legitimacy of it, but I forget that. I just looked at it as if it was fiction, even though like I looked at it as if like this could happen to anybody, even if this story is real or not, that doesn't matter because there are real accounts of this, right? So I just like I thought that maybe she didn't really explain it, like the things that the microaggressions he could have made. You know what I mean? Because there are things that are more than the surface about being racist. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of hard to tell. And based off the things that she said in the story, it was hard for anyone to make that distinction.
So I guess first I'll say, thank you for voicing this, very frank and honest opinion, Mario. I appreciate it. And like I said, these are tricky stories because they're right on the line of racism and not racism, right? And so that's why they're great examples, because they're perfect for us to kind of discuss what does it even mean to be racist, right? And why is Wilkerson choosing to use this language of caste rather than this language of race, right? If we think, is he considering her sort of a separate category from himself and treating her differently than he would treat someone who, for example, who is like in his family, right? Because they talk about family, that becomes sort of a different question, right? And so like, let's see, Daniel said in the chat, he seems more lazy than racist. Absolutely, right? He's sort of lazy. He's kind of grumpy, right? I got a grumpy cat plumber emoji thing, meme going here, right? He's sort of grumpy. He's sort of lazy. Is it because he's racist? Well, that's, I guess, for us to decide. Go ahead.
So I went completely like opposite to like I don't know who is speaking, but of what they were saying. For me, I feel like it was racist because it wasn't until like she said something about herself that this guy was like helping her. Like before that, she was like telling him how like he had something wrong with, I forgot what it was, and he didn't listen to her at all. And it wasn't until she talked about her mother's death and like tried to get him to speak where he like listened to her. And also I was also saying how it's racist because like he knocks on the door and like he asks, are you the woman of the house? So like for me it's like, so you're saying a Black woman can't be the woman of the house? Like I don't know, for me it seemed kind of racist, but like I understand where they're coming from.
Yes, and I understand where you're coming from too, and I completely see how he said that. But I'm gonna come back to what I don't even know who said it before. At the first example at the restaurant, you
Mhm.
saw how there was a clear comparison. How that person, you clearly saw how they were acting one way towards that table,
Mhm.
but they were acting another way towards that table, right?
Mhm.
You never saw this plumber's interaction with anybody else, no matter what race they are. You don't know if this person is just like, just a jerk all around.
It's true. And so again, this is the complexity of this conversation, right? Is that if somebody, we could say, maybe it's not racism, maybe they're just being a jerk. We could say maybe they're just having a bad day. And in fact, again, the example that sticks in my mind the most, that's precisely what was said by the police chief about the murderer who killed a bunch of people working at the massage parlors a few weeks ago. Um, let's see what else we got. It's difficult for a person to experience racism to determine what isn't racist. It's way more personal. The same way men can't claim what is sexist completely, also takes the spotlight away from women. I think what this is showing to us is it's actually, again, it's a fuzzy term. It's kind of a naughty term. It's an uncomfortable term. And unfortunately, we're actually out of time. But maybe what I'll say, let's just say in our last 30 seconds, is how do we move forward? Let's just give Wilkerson the last word here. She's calling for empathy, right? And if we had more time to talk about the plumber, that's exactly what she demonstrates in that story, right? Is even if he's being a jerk because he's racist, maybe he's being a jerk because he's sexist, right? Maybe it has nothing to do with race. Maybe he's like a great guy across races. He's just a jerk to women. We don't know, right? But for whatever reason, he was being a jerk to her, and the way she pulled him out of that was an act of empathy. And we could say it shouldn't be her responsibility to bring out this empathy in the jerks of her life. And I would frankly agree with that statement. But at the same time, she proves, right, through this story that this is actually a very powerful tool, is to connect with somebody in a deep, meaningful, emotional, personal way will allow us to break beyond these barriers. Actually, we don't
Hey,
end at
Professor.
15, right? We have 5 minutes left, don't we?
Yeah, we ended 120. Can I just say something real quick?
Yeah, please.
Because I know I kind of seem like a jerk face. Like,
No,
listen,
you're
that guy is
doing great,
probably
Mario.
racist.
I appreciate you. But yeah, go ahead. Say your piece.
Like, listen, like if I had to make a gut call, like, yeah, that guy's probably racist. Like,
Yeah.
okay, like I get it. But like you can't like look at this is the problem though, because you can't look at every single situation and
Mhm.
just numb it down. Because like you said, he could be sexist. He's probably racist, sexist, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's like, I don't know. Like, it's just so hard to tell.
Mhm.
Is what I'm saying, and like empathy is where it starts.
Yeah.
Because if you can cancel the oh he might just be a jerk all around, like if you can cancel that, then you can make the distinctions where it's coming from and target it at its source.
Well, and so again, I appreciate you, Mario, because you're taking a difficult position in this class, in this world. But an important one is basically you're asking, what is the basis of this guy's discrimination, right? And we can't really know that, right? We can't really know that. It, like you said before, in the restaurant case, there was almost a variable we could control. It's like here's one table and here's another table, and the people at the two tables look a little bit different, and so therefore it's discrimination based on how people look. With the plumber, we don't really know, and so in the end, kind of like Simone is saying, we gotta trust her, right? And basically say, based on her life experience of being a Black woman in this world, she has been treated a certain way, right? A certain way throughout her life as, let's just say, a different category. And sometimes maybe it's based on being a woman. Sometimes maybe it's based on being a Black person. Sometimes maybe it's based on something else entirely. But what do these all have in common is, again, treating somebody as a different category, right? That's kind of what this whole caste thing is about. And again, if we tie it back to this thread thing, right? I know this felt like very kind of academic and weird and difficult, but now we can begin to really say, what does it mean to shed the thread in America? What do you guys think? What does it mean to shed the thread in America? Do you have new thoughts on this? I know we just sort of jumped into it and it was a little disruptive because I didn't prepare you guys for it. But what do you think? What does it mean to shed the thread in America? How can the plumber shed his sacred thread? we could use the language of empathy. That it feels almost too easy, right? I feel like that's something that's kind of shoved down our throat, is to be nice to each other and that sort of thing. In a way, what it's saying is he has to, in his mind, reimagine where he sits in the world, right? This imaginary plumber or this imaginary waiter. He has to reimagine himself as not being the top of the food chain in terms of race or in terms of sex or in terms of entitlement or in terms of jobs or in terms of whatever else, right? I think in a previous lesson we talked about Charlottesville, Virginia, right? How the mob of people were shouting, "You will not replace us," right? I mean, what are they holding on to? This is the sacred thread. It is the entitlement of the job, and frankly, I have it too. I want the good job. I want the benefits. I want health insurance. I do have health insurance, to be honest, but some people don't, right? I want all of these things that I feel like are due to me, and it's I don't think they're due to me because I'm a white man, but I just want them, right? And so I'm not marching in the street with a tiki torch saying you will not replace us. But in some ways, this is exactly the sentiment that needs to be shed, right? And the last line, if you didn't read it, I encourage you to read it. It's really very nicely written. The ideas are great. Clearly, you guys care about the subject, so I encourage you to read it. A world without caste would set everyone free, right? And she's saying this would set the plumber free, this would set the waiter free, this would set all of us free, right? It would set the Brahmin's father free, it would set all of us free. So I encourage you to go back and to think about, what is it that is trapping these people? I did not go over the exam scores. We'll do that next time. So then now we're really out of time. The conversation was too good to shut it off. So we'll pick up with this next time. Any last thoughts before we call it a day? Does anybody have anything simmering they want to let out?
Yes.
Go ahead.
You know who is shedding their thread?
Who's that?
Kyrie Irving.
Okay. Why do you say that?
He did. All right. So last night, Dennis Schroeder, a player on the Lakers,
Yeah.
they got into a scuffle.
Oh.
And Dennis Schroeder called him the N-word.
Oh no.
Like, not the hard R, but he called him the M-word.
Yeah.
And Kyrie is like, I don't know, he's like breaking boundaries with what it means to, represent his ethnicity. And he got really, really upset with this other player for that.
Did he punch him or something?
They, what was that?
Did he punch him?
No, they were getting like physical. There was no hands thrown, but like he was like, "Don't call me that." Like,
yeah,
you know what I mean? Like they were getting. It was very, very physical. And like later, he got thrown out of the game. And he tweeted later, "The M-word is a derogatory racial slur. It will never be a term of endearment, reclaimed, flipped. Never forget it's foul in true history. Throw the M-word out the window right alongside all the other racist words that are used to describe my people. We are not slaves or ends." So I just thought it was really cool that like Kyrie, like, because I feel like that's also no matter what your stance on it is, to him, that like cut deep, and that also needs to be touched on. You know what I mean? I think that Kyrie is doing his part of shedding that thread for him, or that.
I like this example. I like that you brought up history because as we talked about in this book in CAST and in our class, history is sort of what leads to these social constructions, and if we leave those historical origins out, then it's also important to mention that the other point guard on the other team is also black. So it's true, but he's also German, isn't he, Schroeder?
Yeah, but that's also, I feel like it's important to mention that as well.
Slightly different cultural background, though. I mean, importantly different, I would say. But anyways, we're way over time now, so people need to leave. Goodbye. Have a good day. But yeah, thank you for sharing, Mario. I totally agree. And one thing to keep in mind
thank you.
Okay, see you later, Simone. One thing to keep in mind too is who has the thread, because in a way, according to sort of Wilkerson's caste ideology, it wouldn't really be Kyrie wearing the thread. It's almost, that would be like Kyrie like having a big bonfire of everybody else's threads or something like that.
Take that thing off.
Right, exactly. And don't try to put that on me. Don't put that word on me, right? That word has no place in this world anymore.
And no matter like how you feel about it, like that's how he feels. And there's a lot of people that feel the same way.
Yeah.
So like I can't really speak on that, but like I just thought that was so cool.
Yeah.
He's awesome.
Well,
Yeah, I think it's cool too, because it's like that word in general is bad. So the fact that like people of his color are still like saying that they could use it, it's like, no, we should just like delete it in period. Like it shouldn't even be used at all. So I thought it was cool that he said that.
and I think the question remains is what to do with this history. And we can pick up with this next time, but Wilkerson talks about a truth and reconciliation committee for America, where we really look this history in the face and see, what does this word really carry with it, right? And I think it comes back to Kyrie's point and Mario's point, is this is why it shouldn't be used, is because of this weight that it carries, right? Once it loses that weight, then in a way it gets to sort of persist, right? So if we all see it for what it is, then it will be deleted, right? Then we will be able to finally remove it. Excellent discussion, everybody. I love it. But now we should go because I got to teach another class and you guys have other things to do. So thanks for hanging out for extra time.